All right, thanks everyone for joining. We have a big group today, and we have a lot to cover. So I want to thank everyone for taking some time today to listen in. Um, like I said, the webinar will be recorded. All attendees will receive a copy of the recording and our State of the Legal Industry white paper afterwards. My name is Phil Flora. For those that don't know, I'm the Vice President of Sales and Marketing here for Leopard Solutions. I have the great honor of moderating today's webinar as we have some great speakers joining us to provide some insights on 2020 and look ahead into 2021. Joining me today, we have Laura Leopard, CEO and founder of Leopard Solutions, Jeffrey Lowe, global law firm practice leader for Major Lindsay in Africa, Andrew Slade, senior manager in growth and analytics for Perkins Coie, and Trish Lilly, Chief Marketing and Business Development Officer for Struck. So as I said, we have a lot to cover. Just an overview. Laura is going to start by providing a little overview of the Leopard research on attorney hiring and law firm growth during 2020. Then we'll transition over to get some insights and perspectives from Jeffrey, Andrew, and Trish on 2020, and we'll wrap up taking a look at what everyone sees for 2021 as we go forward. If you have any questions, drop them to the chat. Sharice is moderating that. She'll respond accordingly. We'll also look to table some of those questions to the end for some discussion. But from there, Laura, you can take it away.
Bill. All right. So first of all, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We spent a lot of effort and time to look over what happened in 2020 and see what our data told us about what happened in 2020. And sometimes what you think happened and what really happened can diverge when you start looking at numbers. And at the end of the webinar, we're also going to take a look at what may happen in 2021. So let's start back at the beginning of the year. And this year started out like almost all the other years. Every year we see growth in the top 200 firms. We're really going to talk about the top 200 firms. That's a good steady measurement of what happened in the industry. And every year we see lateral hiring grow, we see the firms get bigger, we see, lots of mergers, all things happened. And the first quarter looked like everything was on track to be a really exceptional year because there was growth in all hiring metrics. So it looked like it was really going to be an exceptional year. And then, of course, we all know what happened. In mid-March, the bottom of the world really fell out and just changed all around us. One Friday at Leopard, we just told everyone, take your laptops home, just stay home next week. We'll let you know when you can come back. And the next week, all of Manhattan was shut down and everyone went home and just waited. And no one knew how long it was going to last. So everyone started looking to data experts. So there were all these people coming out with these, prognostications of it's going to be over in June. That was the prevailing wisdom. In June, we'll all be back to normal. This will just be a blip in the moment, but that didn't happen. However, it is possible that the law firm's impression that this was only going to be a temporary situation informed their response to the pandemic. They did not think, and no expert thought this was going to be a long drawn out process. They all thought it was going to be a very temporary situation. This was not going to be like 2008 and 2009, where we knew we had a long slog of recovery. So because of that, we do think that the firms reacted a bit differently. So immediately we saw that hiring was put on hold. Now it took a while for the lateral numbers to sort of adjust because there were deals that were already inked, there were deals that were already in the works, and those continued to go through. But after that, there were not a lot of new deals being made for lateral hires. And it became sort of a feast or famine type situation, both for law firms and for recruiters. And it sort of mirrored what was going on in the world around us, right? I mean, some people like us were lucky enough to take their computer home and were able to continue their work. But then there were so many others where their industry was just completely shut down. They had no way to make a living and they lost their jobs. Well, that sort of happened to some of our law firms because they were very closely tied to industries that were constricting at the time. Recruiters that were tied to those law firms also found their work constricted. Very little associate, hiring was going on. And we began to see a lot of strategic hiring going on. So what was being done was a lot of strategic partner placements, very little associate hiring, but there was some hiring going on with a lot of thought behind it and what was going to help the firm grow in a biz dev way. So while the hiring continued, as you can see from this graph, it was much, much lower than normal. If you were watching the news as we were, as everybody was constantly looking for layoff news. They were constantly looking to see, what the firms were doing to react. And it was all over the board. Some firms were announcing layoffs. Some were announcing they were going to cut salaries. Some were, cutting staff. We heard about stealth layoffs. So all along this journey, we kept waiting to see, what the results of all of this was going to be. At first we thought, I think by August, we'll know where the firms are in their layoffs, but that didn't happen. There was no great drop off, right? Then we thought, okay, September, October, that's when, the truth will be seen and we'll see who's really at the law firm. Well, that didn't really happen either. I mean, reporters were calling us all the time saying, okay, has it happened yet? Have you seen it yet? And it's like, no, we haven't seen it yet. So hold on, we'll let you know. We'll let you know what we know. But this is what we ended up seeing. So the number of people who left their firms was actually down from the number that exited in 2019. So attrition was actually lower in 2020 than it was in 2019. Fewer people left their firm, but they were not replaced at the normal rate. And that's what the data showed us. Mass layoffs, that big drop off the continental shelf, never really happened. Now, it could be that the attrition that we saw was due, some of it was due to layoffs, certainly, but the numbers don't lie. And the attrition was less in 2020. So that's a very interesting sign. You'll also look at what happened with mergers during 2020. The number of attorneys who moved due to a merger jumped, by a dramatic margin, 314 people in 2019 and 1,687. So there were some really big mergers that happened that caused some firms to undergo some hyper growth. Oh, I skipped and went too fast there. See if I can get that back. There we go. So our growth decline numbers gave us a really interesting story. So while the attrition was lower, the numbers being hired were very, very low. People left, they were not replaced. Those entry-level hires were just at a slight fraction of what they were in 2020. And most firms just weren't growing, and you could see it in our growth decline report. So you can see in 2020 that 140 firms were at zero or negative growth in 2020. That is a huge number. We're talking about 200 firms. 140 of them were at zero to negative growth. That same category in 2019 was 85. So that's a lot of firms that slipped into that category. 1 to 5%. So you've got 1 to 5% growth. We had about 46 in that slot. 6 to 9%, sort of moderate growth. We had 14 in that slot. And then hyper growth, anywhere from 27 to 66%. We had 5 firms that underwent hyper growth in 2020. So that told a really interesting number. So we started to look at it in a few different ways. Now, if you are unfamiliar with our new law firm index, I'm going to show you some statistics from it in a second. But this is Leopard's new ranking system for law firms. It's based on ungameable data. We're looking at data points like what is their growth decline number, what is the retained experience number at the firm, how do they promote, where is their RPL score over a 5-year period, going up, going down. And then we look at the ROI on laterals. These are all recent laterals. So if you can't hang on to your laterals in the first year of hire, that really tells us there's something going on at the firm. We also look at ROI on entry-level hires, and then we look at those diversity numbers. So watching what happened in our law firm index, this is what we saw. 49% of the firms in the top 200 dropped in status. Now, we have very simple statuses. We have very good, good, fair, and poor. So 49 firms dropped in status, right? We had 93 firms slip from the status of very good to good. 3 slipped from very good to fair. 2 moved up they moved from, good, where they once were fair, and then 1 slipped from good to poor. So what we saw, 49 firms dropped an entire status, but then we had 46% of those firms lose points in the index, but it didn't actually take them to a different status. So using this, we could really look at the firms closely and see how they were doing. And not so much growth wasn't the only metric. There were a lot of other metrics in there we looked at. We knew it was an unusual time. So when this index was slated to come out last spring, and we held on to it because of the pandemic. Then we made an adjustment in the score. So the growth decline number, if you went into negative territory, would not be as penalizing as it would have been before the pandemic. So there is a little bit of a governor on these scores at the moment. So let's look at a single firm and see what happened to this firm over the course of time. So in 2018, this is a large top 200 international law firm. And in 2018, they hired 220 entry-level hires and 57 laterals. In 2019, they hired 165 entry levels, 56 laterals. In 2020, they hired 28 entry-level hires, 65 laterals. Makes perfect sense. You're in the middle of the pandemic. Is this really the time to onboard these law students into your law firm? I totally get it, but it was driving their growth decline score down. They lost only 227 people in 2020. Now, if you look back at 2018, they lost 312, but they were replacing that number. In 2019, they lost 282. But they were replacing that number. So in 2020, they lost fewer people, but they were not replacing them. They did hire more laterals, however, and I think this speaks to that strategic hiring model that a lot of the firms went to. Now let's look at the same firm between January and February. So the first 2 months of 2020, we see 149 entry-level hires going into this firm. So those people that they did not onboard in 2020, they onboarded in the first 2 months of 2021, which is a great sign. They also hired 13 laterals in the same period. So for this firm, they are doing an almost immediate adjustment in 2021. In 2020, they were very conservative, and their attrition was lower, but their hiring was just negligible. But I do think they made some strategic hires. So this is one firm. Let's start looking at all the firms in the top 200. Look at that entry-level hiring. So in 2020, there were in 2020 of January and February for laterals, we see 1,672 hires, right? And that's just for the month of January and February. And that number is pretty darn close for the first 2 months of 2021. So it's only, a couple hundred behind. But look at those entry levels. So here are those missing law students that did not get hired in 2020. They are now being onboarded with a great pace in 2021. So that's really good news for those kids. Completely different than it was in 2008, 2009, where there was just a missing class of law students that were never onboarded at all. So I think this speaks to the strategy. This is a short-term situation, and these law firms are now reacting quickly. Also, look at what happened in our job program. So in the summer, there were, I think at one point, there were even like 2,800 job openings total in that program. And it started to grow steadily through the fall. It really took off speed January and February. And now we are at pre-pandemic levels of job openings in our job program. We're also seeing a lot of jobs closing at the moment, which is a great sign. People are being hired, right? And new jobs are opening up. So everything is pointing in a much more hopeful direction for 2021. I do have some predictions for 2021, but we will get into that in just a little while. And now I'm going to throw this back to Phil.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Laura. Nice overview. All right, so let's jump into this and discuss some of these points. Jeffrey, I'm going to start with you. Now, for Major Lindsay, you're focused primarily on the partner side of things. Can you talk about any of the observations you saw in working with some of the law firms you guys did last year?
Sure, absolutely. I think the biggest one, and Laura alluded to it in her introduction, was right at the start of the pandemic, when this started all going down. We saw one of three things happen from the firms we were talking with. There was one sector who said, we're at a full stop. We don't want to hear from you. We don't want to receive any resumes. We're not sure what's going to happen here. We are completely shutting down lateral partner hiring. That was really a small minority, though. I'd say maybe 10% of the firms that we work with, if that many. The vast majority went to mode, what I call mode 2, which was, look, we are still very interested in things that we have in the pipeline. We want to see those through. We're still very interested in our strategic objectives, but for the opportunistic hiring that we might be doing, and there was a lot of it going on because the last 7 years have been incredibly great years for the industry. Most firms put that on pause in March and April. But there was that mode 3 sector, and it's typically those at the top of the food chain who told us, and in fact affirmatively reached out to us and said, look, we see this as a time of opportunity. We want you to continue to send us your very best people. We want to see people that are great strategic fit for us, and also people that you just think might be a good opportunistic hire for us. And so that's really how things started for us in what I would say March and April.
Awesome. And then Andrew, to you, because I know in your efforts you support, the growth on strategy for Perkins and partner placement and everything in the firm. What changes, if anything, did your firm kind of make once the pandemic hit?
Sure. Perkins Coie aspires to be the most trusted advisor to innovative and industry-leading companies. And frankly, that vision didn't change when the pandemic hit, but the needs of some of our clients changed. And so our first response was to go out and do a lot of client listening. At that point, you have to get everything aligned, messages from clients to partners, partners to practice group chairs, practice group chairs to recruiting team, and then getting that message out in the market. But once we got all of those ducks in a row, similar to Jeffrey's comment, we thought it was a good time to be out making strategic investments in the market. I'm also very fortunate. I work with a number of very talented colleagues in recruiting and IT and HR, and we really did have to do an all hands on deck to transition to remote hiring and remote onboarding. But for firms that were flexible and knew what their clients were looking for, we thought it was a time to invest in confidence.
Awesome. Trish, in your role overseeing the marketing and business development strategy for Strzok, onboarding partners during last year and having them, trying to figure out ways to integrate their client relationships with the rest of the firm. What was some of the things you guys did at your firm to work on that? And you're on mute. You're on mute, Trish. Sorry.
Right. Newbie mistake. We had a lot of time to think about it because we onboarded our first Lateral partner during once we all went to remote work within 2 weeks, right? So not really, but we, brought this person on very quickly. And honestly, I don't think in some respects our approach changed very much. As Andrew pointed out, if you're concerned with your client needs and focused on your clients, you're going to want to achieve the same objectives, but you do have to shift gears in how you go about getting to the end goal. So we embraced, digital, we embraced being online. Our tech team mobilized very quickly. We were sort of preparing for this prior to actually going remote anyway. We were wrapping up a 3-year strategic plan, which had a lot of technology advancements as part of that. But in terms of onboarding clients, just making sure that we were in front of them, that we're looking to make everything easy and make it a seamless transition, reduce the stress for the partner who's coming in the door. They have enough on their plates, right? In a normal transition, then you put a pandemic on top of it. Maybe they have young kids at home, whatever. One of our laterals pretty immediately contracted COVID and then had a lengthy battle with pneumonia. So the last thing you want to do is cause additional stress for someone who's struggling with a health condition and maybe some other things at home. So we made sure that we were reaching out to clients as much as possible, checking in on what they needed. I think consistent communication, frequent communication, you don't want to be a nuisance, but you want to make sure that people know that you're there. And then, just from the general human aspect, I think those firms that are human got to showcase that, right? And those that aren't, and there are those that aren't, it became clear. And so, I think in some respects, those folks who joined us got to see that human side very quickly because there was a lot of personal outreach. I mean, this situation has removed a lot of those work-life barriers, and that can be a little bit weird at times, right? It especially was weird in March of last year. At this point, we're all kind of accustomed to seeing, our pictures and whatever, but just making sure that people knew that they could ask, who they could ask. And then we've done a lot, and I don't want to bore you all with the inside baseball, but to orchestrate those organic networking moments that happen within the firm. For laterals who are coming in, for first years, for associates, and then as well for the clients as we do introductions to others at the firm who can help them.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And around that question, I'll just stick with you if you don't mind. Internal communication, external communication with clients. Did you guys have to, implement any new technology, or did you have a lot of that already in place? And I don't know if you have any specifics you want to share.
We had a lot already in place. We use WebEx for video conferencing, and we'll use Zoom here and there, but official policy is we don't. But we certainly boosted our WebEx usage. I think as was seen in the report and has been pointed out by others, that in terms of scheduling interviews and having access to people and just dealing with all of that kind of admin headache piece of recruiting and onboarding, life got so much easier, right? Because nobody has anywhere to go and we know right where you are, so that part was definitely eased. We did go with, I think, a new platform for the summer associate and on-campus interviewing. But in terms of, lateral partners, associates, counsel, we just continue to use WebEx. With our recruiting materials, we went a little bit more to web-based types of collateral and things like that. PDFs we always use, but greater use of those, that sort of thing. And then I think I think it dovetails as well with client entertainment and client touch points. So We do the casual ones. We do, like I said, those little kind of informal organic ones. And then we launched quite a number of what I think are creative ways to entertain and spend time with clients. So we have a women's book club that's on chapter 9. We're on our 9th book.
Nice.
We've done some cooking classes. We had a former royal chef come in and teach people how to make, crumpets, and he talks a little bit of trash on the royal family. I mean, we have any number of activities going on, but underscoring it all, I think, is just the need to be authentic and to be there talking to your clients and talking to your teams, whether it's staff, whether it's attorneys, whatever else, because everybody is a little bit shaky right now, and everyone is a little bit bored right now, so to the degree that we can reassure people and alleviate the boredom and also make them rest assured that their legal needs and their careers and everything else are in good hands, I think that's what we need to focus on.
Awesome. All right, great. Andrew, kind of back on your end now, I know in your role, you utilize research quite a bit. What key data points do you focus on when you're supporting the growth strategy of the firm? Kind of how do you share that and kind of, how does the firm digest what you're doing and so on?
Yeah, it's a great question. When I'm thinking about strategic growth questions, I tend to focus on 3 different lanes. One, how is the growth going to help the client? How is the growth going to help our current partners? And how is growth going to help our existing partners? And when you hit the middle of that Venn diagram and you have all 3, that's when people tend to get really excited about a particular opportunity. Now, the data that we look at to try to inform those hypotheses depends, frankly, on the opportunity, but there's a couple big buckets that we focus on. We look at client data, we look at competitor data, and we use Leopard a lot when we're doing those types of analyses. We look at economic data, we look at industry data, practice data, regional data. And the real magic is when you can make the connections between each of those different buckets. So I always have a big focus on the quality of the data that we're using, and then also just having actionable business insights. We live in a golden age of data, but that does not mean that people want data dumps. They want to know what the data means and how it connects to other things that they're seeing in the market. And so that's what gets me excited. And frankly, that's when my research tends to get the most traction within the firm.
Awesome. And then Jeffrey, to you, and speaking of research now, I know you guys, you kind of oversee the partner comp survey that you guys do at Major Lindsay. And I think this is the 10th year that you guys just completed,
Yep.
10-year anniversary, and you do it every other year. And 2020 just happened to be the year that you were going to update it. So do you have any insights from your comp survey you want to share?
Sure. Yeah. And it was a funny thing about it too. We'd considered even not doing it because when we start rolling it out, typically in the spring, people were just so consumed with the pandemic. We wondered, is this something that we should be doing this year? But we really came to the decision fairly quickly that, and you'll hear why it was ironic, that we thought it would be really important to put a pin on data from 2020 because it was the expectation. By the way, the 2020 survey collects data from 2019 because that's the last full year that we have when people are filling out the survey. We thought that 2019 was going to represent the high water mark for partner compensation and satisfaction for years to come. And we thought it was going to be very important to peg that and understand what it was. So when things went down, we'd understand where the top of the mountain was. But as I've been joking for the last 6 months, a funny thing happened on the way to the pandemic. The work didn't stop. And it's one thing for everyone to have been able to work from home. I mean, in the law firms, really, to your credit for all you practitioners out there, I mean, you did it. You did it in a way I think very few firms and lawyers probably thought they were going to be able to do it, but you did it. But it wouldn't have mattered if the phone stopped ringing and there was actually no work to do while you were sitting and working from home. But it didn't stop, and it became actually clear to us, even as early as the early summer, wow, not only are we not seeing a downturn, we're actually seeing firms start reporting very, very good, very solid results. And as we moved into the fourth quarter, we heard rumors from firms that they were actually having their best years ever. And as you see the data coming out this year, that's certainly going to be the case. And so as it relates to our survey, we launched the survey at the end of the spring, early summer. when this wasn't as clear. And originally, I think it was about 70% of the respondents expected their 2020 compensation to be adversely impacted by the pandemic. But as I got the data and I started writing the report in late summer, early fall, we realized, you know what, this is stale data, at least as it relates to the pandemic. We need to go back out to the market and get their current sense of where they are. And so the percentage went from, it was either 70 or 78% down to, I think, 40% as of September, October. And if we were to have measured it in December, or certainly get the end result in January, would have been just a fraction of that as well. So I think that was the starkest change that we saw, was just the movement of expectations from the beginning of the pandemic to the middle of the pandemic towards what we hope, is the beginning of the end of the pandemic.
Awesome. Before we jump into 2021 and kind of looking ahead, Andrew, someone just was asking about those 3 buckets that you dump, you put all the research and data in. Do you just mention those again?
Yeah, so the lenses for me are, growth that helps our clients, growth that helps our current partners, and growth that helps new partners who'd be joining our firm.
Awesome. Cool. All righty. So we're going to kind of start pushing towards 2021 and kind of the look ahead and see, Laura, you started talking about a little bit in some of the, in your PowerPoint, some of the numbers and entry level hires and the uptick, and we've seen that already. You want to share a little bit more on what you're seeing thus far and what you look ahead, and then we'll jump back to Jeffrey, Andrew, and Trish.
Sure. Well, this is where you get to make some predictions or things to watch out for in this coming year. So there are some things that we have noticed and we're going to be making accommodations for in our data. One is we are seeing some of the larger firms open up some subsidiary companies. So consulting companies, lobbying companies, there may be a rise in that, as it's going to be, I think, sort of a boon for that type of industry and business in 2021. So we will be folding in information on the people working at those subsidiaries into our data, along with firm affiliations. So in the past, you would see firms have a affiliation with a firm in a different country like Saudi Arabia, where they're not allowed to open an office. But now we are seeing a law firm that's taking a different step and doing some firm affiliations right here in the US. It is a different, it's a different arrangement. It's not a merger, right? It's not an acquisition. They're just merely aligning themselves with that firm, tweaking the firm name in the bargain. So a firm just did that to a law firm in Alabama. And it's something we want to watch, because if it is a new way to deal with a merger with possibly less risk, we may see a rise in these affiliations. We are going to accommodate that in our data. So you're going to know where that firm sits on that hierarchy, but we want those attorneys in our data with the proper name. So we'll be making that accommodation. We do think that M&A is really going to heat up in 2021 for a few reasons. One, law firms are back in that growth mode. As we saw from that one law firm example, they really kind of went from 0 to 60 in growth in the first couple of months of this year. Other firms will be looking not only for lots of lateral hires, but they're also going to be looking for acquisition targets. We have a new tool that will help with that. It is our new M&A tool that's in the BI suite. But there are a lot of firms we can tell at from looking at our law firm index that are struggling, that are having some problems, maybe looking for a white knight. But then there are also firms that want to go out and grow quickly in a new area, in a new cities. And we really think that's going to heat up in 2021. We've all talked about working from home and what an adjustment it was for everyone. And I do think work from home is going to be here in some hybrid form for law firms, as well as our company and companies across the US. They do have a really good reason to do that. And that is the fact that it really might help them with their attrition problems. If you are a fan of our growth decline report, you can really tell there are some firms that have a lot of attrition problems. If you've seen our ROI report, you can tell that's a problem. If this helps to alleviate that, I mean, remember, attrition was lower in 2020. Maybe it's because there were fewer opportunities around. Maybe it was also easier to work for that law firm. We're not sure, but we do think this hybrid model is here to stay. The interest in cybersecurity for these law firms is going to be really great this year. Especially if we continue in this hybrid model, everybody's working from home, they have to have increased security in their internet provider, their computer, all the files that they deal with, all of that will go up. So that will be areas where they're going to be looking to spend money in 2021. We do think litigation is going to rise. All indications are that there have been a lot of litigation that just has not moved forward in 2020, but is waiting to move forward. And there's going to be lots of lawsuits surrounding many areas of the pandemic. So we think we will see a sharp rise in litigation in 2021. We are hoping we're going to see a rise in diversity as well. We have law firms that have committed with the Mansfield rule to hire more diverse attorneys at their firm. We have companies now coming out and really trying to hold their feet to the fire. So we expect to see a rise in diversity. In our white paper, we're drawing a line and we're like, okay, here's where we are now. At the end of the year, we expect to see some difference in these numbers. We expect more than half a point or a point to rise in diversity. So we'll be watching that this year, and I really hope this prediction is going to come true, that we will see a rise in diversity hiring at law firms. We're also seeing some fundamental changes in the C-suite. Our friend Bruce McEwen said we're going to see some states change some laws that will allow law firms to have owners that are not attorneys. And if that happens, I think you're going to see a lot more people who don't have a law degree in that C-suite. We already see it at firms. We had to adjust things in our database so we could show them to you. So this is a growing trend, and I think we will see more of that in 2021, especially if those laws are changed. It makes sense in so many ways to have a business person run a business and have lawyers run the legal end of the business. And hopefully that will help make them even more successful. So this is what we think we want to watch and what we think might happen in 2021.
Thanks, Laura. Jeff, I'm going to send it over to you. And I think actually, this might feed into maybe your insights for 2021, but one of the questions was, in addition to New York and DC, what other cities are expected to see the most lateral partner activity? So, I don't know what you have in store to talk about, but, maybe provide some sense there.
Sure, I'll start with that, Phil. Certainly DC is going to be very active. New York, the Bay Area is just absolutely on fire and has been for several years now, and is probably the most active, most competitive lateral market. I think Boston remains very strong. I think things have cooled a bit in Texas generally, in Dallas and Houston. And certainly what was going on with the energy markets earlier or late last year didn't really help those markets either. I think in terms of practice areas, I think Laura's absolutely right. M&A is going to be very hot. Litigation is going to be very hot. Anything really on the corporate side, but especially with the new administration and on the litigation and enforcement front, I think you're going to see a tremendous amount of enforcement activity coming out of this administration, which is great for those cities that have large enforcement related practices, SEC, FTC, CFTC, things like that, all of the fraud, and also all of the fraud emanating from the PPP program. We're starting to see cases now. We have for several months now, and we think those are going to continue.
Awesome. Andrew, on your front, what do you see, and how is Perkins going to kind of position themselves in 2021?
I expect that the lateral partner market is going to continue to rebound in 2021. We might not get up to 2019 levels right away, but given the fact that, as Jeffrey mentioned earlier, firms did quite well in 2020 and probably have a little bit more money to spend this year. The fact that there's likely pent-up demand of laterals who would have moved during a normal year, but decided that with the circumstances of the pandemic, they didn't want to put themselves out there. And then, frankly, just firms and laterals getting better with recruiting and technology. I think there's going to be more movement in 2021 than people expected. And I think that the firms that benefit most from it are going to be the folks who are nimble and are looking to see how things are changing on the ground, and are also willing to be flexible as people continue to make life and work and everything else work in the middle of 2021 in this pandemic.
Awesome. And then Trish, from your perspective, how will you see specifically maybe on marketing and from a business development, client representation perspective? I don't know if you have some insights that you want to provide as well in that area.
I mean, I think on the recruiting front, I mean, in looking at our numbers, and again, we have our terrific recruiting team, Regina Robbins and Victoria Campbell, who handle our specifically our laterals that come in and join the firm. So I just bask in their glow and watch. But we onboarded just about the same number of attorneys in 2020 as we did in 2019, which was ballpark 10% of the firm. So 10% increase, whatever. I was a journalism major for a reason. Although I do love my data, so I get that, Andrew. I just need somebody else to crunch it for me. So I agree that momentum will continue with firms that are onboarding in smart ways, that are growing in smart ways. I do think that from a marketing perspective, a recruiting perspective, there will be a need to be continue to be creative and versatile, both in how we deliver services to clients and make sure we stay connected to clients, and in how we onboard and really help people when they join our firm to immerse themselves in the culture. I mean, that's a tough thing to try to do virtually, or can be. I mean, I think it's fun. It's a puzzle, it's a challenge, and it's something exciting to do. I do think that there are folks probably who sat safely where they were in 2020 who will now move in 2021, now that this is, you sort of understand, okay, this is an evolving normal and it is what it is. By the same token, I don't think you can remove the human toll that, and changes that occurred in 2020. I mean, 500,000 people died. A lot of people lost folks in their family. They dealt with illness. They dealt with a lot of other things. Maybe they spent more time with their kids, whatever it happens to be. So I think choices may be driven in ways that they were not prior to this, or that will be exacerbated or deepened, and certain variables will enter into the decision-making that weren't as prioritized before. We're seeing a bit of that. And I think, firms need to, as Laura said, be flexible. They need to recognize that. And we're talking about which cities are going to see growth. I mean, to some degree, it doesn't matter what city you're in, right? So I think we're seeing that as well.
Oh, that's great. It's great. Yeah. I mean, it's just a great point. I mean, look, we're coming up on, a year, I guess, for all the, the pandemic news and everything. And it's an amazing amount of everything that we've gone through over the last year. And I think we're all, from a legal perspective, the legal industry, I think has evolved tremendously over the last year, probably faster and quicker than most people would have imagined. And, we can all hope and pray that things continue in a positive front.
For those of us who have worked in it for decades, I think it's delightful that this was a great catalyst to move us forward at a much higher speed than we otherwise would have moved forward. By the same token, it's a terrible thing that it was due to something that caused so much tragedy. But look, it is where we are, and I don't think that we can ignore that human aspect of it. I talked to a partner the other day, and at the end of the call, she said, okay, so you've met my entire family and my cleaning lady, because kids are coming in, can I have a cookie, this and that, whatever. We do a lot of things at Strzok. We do Strzok United, where we read to each other's kids over Zoom and things like that. So you really get to know people in a way that you would not have otherwise.
That's great. Very cool. Jeffrey, Andrew, you have anything else you guys want to add on your end? Laura as well?
I'll just start on my side. Very, very active market. We're seeing great strength across the country, really across the globe. And also, from our own perspective, a lot of the very top tier firms you see getting into the market. I mean, a little more cautious and wanting to do more targeted, exclusive kind of representation versus going market wide, but really a lot of strength.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Laura?
I'll echo Trish's point, just in terms of the unique ways that we all have learned to connect with one another during the pandemic. It's been fun to watch how quickly it's occurred, and to get those insights into colleagues that you wouldn't otherwise. And one of the silver linings, I suppose.
Okay. And Laura?
In a sense, I think we've become a little, we've become so much more forgiving about things that we would not have accepted in the past, right? A child walking into a meeting, and a vacuum going off in the distance, a dog barking. And I hope that really changes us as we move forward and we remember that. The one thing that it just makes us all so much more human, right? You're just not a person in a job. This is a person that has a life and a family and a child and a dog and other worries that they bring each day, yet they're showing up to work each day. For me, it was the smallest thing, but being on Zoom, I was on Zoom all the time before, but we never had our cameras on, or we rarely had our cameras on. And I think one of the greatest things was that everybody turns their camera on now, and you can see their face, you can see their reaction, and they're a real person to you all of a sudden. They're not a disembodied voice. And I'm sure attorneys at the law firms have found that as they counsel their clients too. It changes the entire relationship. People are not just on the phone talking to their attorney, they're looking at them. They're having FaceTime with that attorney, and that really can change everything.
100%. So we got a couple of questions. I'm going to throw this one out there and you guys can jump in. This one might be a good one for you, Trish. Can you please speak to the need for having clean and accurate data for making business development and legal recruiting decisions? And if you guys all want to jump in, feel free to.
Well, I'm not going to deprive Andrew of a chance to talk about clean and accurate data, but I like my data clean. I like it accurate. Yeah, absolutely crucial, right, to making smart decisions. The more you can dig into your client data, your non-client data, look at the work that you do, how you do it, where you do it, who you do it for, or who you're not doing it for. All of those things can feed smart decisions rather than just kind of doing random acts of marketing or, look, for years, one of my jokes has always been that, and I've worked at many firms, so this is not a strict specific comment, but you always have those partners who say, oh, that company X, we do all their litigation. I'm like, right, except for this pie chart that shows you only do 30%, when you actually pull the data. So you should know from whence you speak so that you can make informed choices about the strategies that you put in place to perhaps maybe get rid of a practice or to grow a practice. Whatever the decision is its own thing, but you want to make sure that you're basing those decisions on fact versus feelings.
Awesome. Andrew, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I don't know why Trish would think that I would have strong feelings about data quality. I don't have a poker face apparently. Look, I mean, at the end of the day, quality data is table stakes for doing quality analysis. I would rather have no data than bad data because people are relying on that information to make their business decisions. So yeah, that's paramount. I think that cleaning data and testing data is the first step for any good type of analysis. And when you find that, it's incredibly valuable, and folks have comfort leaning into it again and again. So yes, I think just as an analyst, if more folks spent time thinking about the quality of their data and less time just jumping straight to step 2, which is the analysis, I think we'd all be better for it.
Awesome.
I think also from a lateral partner market, firms have gotten much, much better about asking for the appropriate information, digging down into the information that they're receiving. And I think from the partner perspective, they understand now, they really need to be much more specific about what it is they're saying is their book, how they've derived that, and be prepared to be tested on that by the firms. It's not enough to just say, oh, I have a $4 million practice. I mean, that's great. It's a great number, but it's literally just a number. I mean, the devil is definitely in the details, and firms, and I think rightly so, we've been the biggest proponents of this forever, are much more strident about digging down into understanding what those numbers mean.
Awesome. Next question, any insight into how firms are working across offices, going after the best candidate regardless of where they're located? You seeing opportunities for cross like location job postings and so on? I don't know who wants to take the lead on that one.
Well, I'll just say quickly, and again, the recruiting piece and is not necessarily my area, but two of the partners who joined our firm this past year are not headquartered in cities where we have an office. So there's been no issue with onboarding them, with getting them integrated with the teams. They're working with folks all across the country. And, we have 4 offices. I've worked at firms with many more, but, and we work for clients all over the world. So I think that folks are just working pretty seamlessly from what I'm seeing, and certainly from the integration aspects of what we've been working on.
Awesome. Jeff, Andrew, Laura, you guys have anything you want to add on that one? No? Okay. And then one last question thus far, I think it was actually a follow-up, I think, to one of your points, Laura, about seeing people's faces on Zoom, accepted pre-recorded videos as an interview, part of the interview process. How do we think that this is going to change, I guess, down the road, the interviewing process? Jeffrey, maybe as well. Will this be something that stays, kind of down the road as part of the interviewing process?
Laura, did you want to take that first?
Well, I'll give you sort of a different perspective. I just had a chat with a friend of mine who is a director, and she's getting a lot of pre-recorded audition tapes. And her immediate thought was just to drop them in the wastebasket, because you really can't get a feel for that entire person in that pre-recorded tape. And I think to a certain extent that could be the same for attorney interviews, because it's not so much what they say in that pre-recorded interview, it's how they respond to your questions. I mean, at the very least, I mean, a pre-recorded interview might help you decide who you don't want to see in a live interview. So it's a weeding out process that may not serve the attorney very well, because they may not be projecting what they're hoping to that law firm.
Yeah, and I think building on what Trish said earlier today, the interviewing by Zoom is absolutely here to stay. It has streamlined the process for the better. And really, I mean, people were very cautious. If you think back to March and April, there was some real concern in the market. Are we really going to hire someone as a partner who's never actually met anybody? And then people realize, you know what, we really don't have the choice. And then the ability to get, especially your top management people who are typically flying all around the world, to be able to let them do it really at their leisure from home, know where they are, they're not spending all their time on a plane, has really made it go much quicker. And I think firms and the partners have gotten very comfortable with that. I think once we go back to in person, I think people really will still like to visit at least the main office that they'd be working out of. But I think people will be perfectly happy not having to jump on a plane to go visit the firm's West Coast offices if they really don't have to.
And one last question. It's on, given how recent there's been a lot of, posting recently about financial results for some of the firms. How will that impact you growing outside the U.S. and let's say London or other offices? How would that affect strategy, in your opinion, if at all? Anyone want to take a stab at that one? Jeffrey, are you seeing a lot of activity overseas, or what do you?
We are actually, we're seeing a ton in London, and we were just on an inter-office call earlier today talking about what we're seeing in Paris as well. So there's there's really definitely growth all around the globe. I think, again, with strong financial results, definitely drives firms to go buy more talent, and they're definitely in the market.
Awesome. All right. Anyone else have anything else? Any other points they want to wrap up? I think I'll speak for everyone. This was very extremely insightful, and I really appreciate everyone's time. Jeffrey, Andrew, Trish, Laura, thank you very much. Sharice, thanks for kind of moderating behind the scenes there, and thanks everyone else for joining. Again, a copy of the recording and a copy of the report will be sent out to all the folks that attended, and we appreciate it, and I hope everyone's doing well. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks
Take
for
care.
wrangling us.
So.
Oh, thank you. Thanks
Take care, guys.
Thanks all.